Counter-Narrative News wanted to share something about the British education system. We're going to have a series of videos, at least two anyway. This first one is going to focus on teachers and teaching. We're going to focus on primary school, but it's very relevant to secondary as well. I've been in the British education system now for a good part of a decade. I've had even more decades-long experience in working with children and young people as a professional youth work coordinator and a youth work manager as well, having delivered some award-winning youth projects. So the reason I'm trying to convey these things is really for people to be more aware of actually what's going on in the British education system. I always say to friends and colleagues and comrades, there's a reason why there isn't live filming with audio from classrooms for the benefit of parents for transparency and to be aware of what happens in the classroom in the school. There's a very good reason for that. It's because the British education system is very manipulative in a false representation and presentation of itself to the parents and the wider community. There's a lot of things that are hidden. A lot of parents are manipulated, and the public at large are very manipulated into the realities. Of course, there are campaigners and organizations that talks about, for example, misogyny in schools, these growing oppressions in schools, racism, poverty, mental health, and other issues. There are people talking about it, but relative to the problems that are growing, there's not much actually being done about it. And the people who are commenting and campaigning around it are, relative to the growing problem, very, very small. So this is going to focus on teachers in schools, and the second video is going to talk about the experience of children in schools and being partly a specialist of so-called special education needs and a quote-unquote one-to-one around that, also having worked in SEN schools. I have a good experience and knowledge, a wider pedagogical, ideological knowledge around these issues. And so coming back to teachers now, why do teachers get into teaching? Why do people get into teaching in the first place? And it's an interesting thing to explore with colleagues in the education system. Is it because they have a love of the best outcomes and interests of children, particularly working class, racialized children of Global South, diasporic communities in the colonial centre? Are they really committed to that form of teaching? Come to that in a second. One really finds that people go into teaching because of career and money. I mean, obviously everyone goes into the world of work for the best possible deals of kind of work practices and conditions and pay and all the rest of it. That's universal, and that's fine. But when it comes to preparing the most vulnerable and those with the least voice as human beings in society, which are children from nursery, early years reception, going into then key stage 1 and 2 primary school, and then even into through secondary school. These are children in our society, and really children as a human right of children's human rights deserve the best education, the best educational and cultural and leisure facilities connected to their education in the wider community that's free and accessible, and also sports facilities and good, non-overcrowded, cheap and affordable, really affordable housing that doesn't have any real doesn't sizably eat into the monthly outgoings of children's families. So teachers really go into it for careerism. They see the long holidays, they see the relative decent pay and working conditions, and they think from the outset that it's a good career move. Having gone into teaching, obviously, the industry, like the rest of the public sector, successive governments, both Labour and Tory, since the 60s actually, have been really just taking apart the public sector through creeping privatization and other mechanisms. Then you go into the teacher training courses in which like potential or wannabe teachers they have to go through the training to become QTS, a fully qualified teacher, or they get the postgraduate certificate of education, the PGCE as well, which is another qualification you need to be a fully qualified teacher in the British education system. So what is the teacher training all about? Now, teacher training providers are not all exactly the same. They have slightly different approaches to pedagogy, the science of like teaching children and teaching in general. Some are more right-wing and some are more, a bit more liberal and left and a bit more understanding of the deeper issues that pertains to a child's experience in the education system. But by and large, teacher training reflects the use of education by the British state. The British state is a colonial and white supremacist capitalist state, and its education system seeks to train up children from a very early age to attempt to normalize them into becoming what is known in Marxism as quote-unquote wage slaves, i.e. people have no other way to live other than selling their ability to work on the labor market. If you don't sell your labor, you don't really survive. Hence, quote-unquote wage slavery. And so if you see, and we're going to go more into this about children's experience in schools, but if you see from year one children basically have a daily routine that's very similar to the just standard office routine in offices for adults. But we'll go into that more in the subsequent episode. Back to the teacher training. Does the teacher training develop social empathy and understanding of the social, cultural, political, and historical context of the children that they're teaching? No, not at all. It touches upon it briefly because you're talking about the science of teaching and the science of learning to children. So there has to be some psychological understanding and physiological understanding of what children are capable of. And of course, children are capable of an enormous amount. And again, this will be the subsequent video, but if you see the amount of pressure and unjust and unnecessary pressure put on children to learn as much as they do at such younger and younger ages, they can do it, but what's the consequence of that in terms of those who can't catch up with this momentum, those who then become marginalized and peripheralized, and the mental health and emotional and then lifelong impacts around employment, housing, relationships, substance abuse, all of that. None of that is explored in teacher training. None of that is explored, even in the most lefty, liberal teaching training provider, university course. That is just absent in the teacher training courses that people conduct to becoming a fully qualified teacher in Britain. So there's no social context to teaching. And then when you go once you become a fully qualified teacher or support staff in the classes, then in schools the situation is even worse. And why is it even worse in the actual schools and education system? The reason is because when you're a student in a teacher training course, a lot of it is lecture-based, seminar-based, and you have to do different assignments, etc. But increasingly, you take on more and more classes, and then then you go into an actual school. You pick up all the toxicity and the dysfunction, and the anxieties and insecurities, and the whole kind of Karen culture, which generally dominates atmospheres between staff members in schools. But let's explore a little bit more of what's going on in the schools itself once you become a fully qualified teacher. So there's growing pressures in schools, as aforementioned, the disassemblement, the fragmentation through privatization of all types of means in the public sector, including in schools, is growing apace. That puts more and more pressure on all staff across the whole hierarchy of the staff of any given school institution. Class sizes continue to rise as they've risen, so the average is around 30 pupils per one classroom teacher, and then they're lucky to have a teaching assistant in the room. Sometimes they don't, and often they don't, especially in the schools that are being institutionally failed, of which there are many across the country. I've worked in such schools in Lambeth and Southwark, for example, in South London, and it's just a ridiculous situation. The needs of the children are massive. You have one classroom teacher. Sometimes you have a TA in the room. Often you don't. Good luck trying to relay and then achieve what the government thinks you should be achieving in that context. It's just ridiculous. Growing pressure through privatization, putting pressure on the hierarchy. The hierarchy in schools is extremely racist and classist. The higher up in the hierarchy, the more white and privileged you become. The lower in the hierarchy, the more poor and black that you are. Catering staff, ground staff, cleaning staff, teaching assistants, SEN one-to-ones, intervention teachers, support staff. All of these are disproportionately migrant and black working class. And by black, I mean the wider black sense in terms of the global South racialized diaspora in the colonial centre. And then it's the children around the more kind of vulnerable and marginalized children around SEN, etc., are really negatively impacted. But we'll talk about that in the subsequent episode. And then there's all the growing social problems that you see in the general community and society, which is directly impacting children in the school. So just today, a child, 8-year-old of East African heritage in a school in West London discloses to me that he thinks Andrew Tate is great. And he says, Andrew Tate is great, he's become a Muslim, he's great. If you vape in front of Andrew Tate, who'll give you a slap in the face, but he likes to smoke cigars. An 8-year-old is positively referencing Andrew Tate as a result of colonial social media advocacy, pumping this stuff into children's heads, and possibly he's inculcating some of these notions from older members in his family, perhaps siblings and cousins, etc. As a way this is intergenerationally kind of handed down from the older children to the younger one in the community in general and in families, etc. In these contexts of growing racism and misogyny and homophobia, in the context in which police are conducting strip searches of children in schools, in the context of things like Andrew Tate just running amok in the minds of our children, is the education system on a governmental, county, regional and local level doing much about any of this? No, absolutely not. Absolutely nearly next to nothing. Do teachers feel confident raising these concerns with senior leadership teams and senior people in education? Not really. Often, not always, often, not every institution in school, but often, it's very a regular and frequent occurrence that the quote-unquote safeguarding structure and culture in a school, and safeguarding is if children are basically going through any type of abuse or vulnerable situations and they disclose something, then there's a safeguarding mechanism where the school that you report it immediately on the day, and then the safeguarding and the senior leadership need to take action with other statutory and relevant related organizations to address this. But often in schools, the culture is that the safeguarding team or lead will make you feel bad and guilty, and they might even punish you because doing a safeguarding disclosure means more bureaucracy, means more work, means more challenges for these colleagues in the education system, and they don't want that. They resent that, and often they're manipulating parents, and they're manipulating the children actually, and also partially the parents. So if there is some just blatant abuse happening to the child, they'll try and kind of downplay it and gaslight you and say, you've got something wrong and it wasn't quite like that. The child is blatantly telling you, I got smacked and whatever adult in their family in the lift in the block of flats coming down for the school run smacked their head several times against the lift wall. There's nothing particularly ambiguous about that, but a safeguarding lead will try to make out something else is going on, and whatever to do with their politics, to do with the local authorities. It's complicated, but the point is that the schools are failing children left, right, and centre, and when the teachers have taken their national strikes, which is in itself indicative of the degree of fragmentation and dysfunctionality increasingly in education that classroom teachers who are actually quite politically, socially and culturally conservative with a small c, that they conduct national strikes. You can see a lot of parents then realizing, especially through the pandemic and the lockdown years, that actually teachers are under a massive amount of pressure. They're generally unhappy despite all the smiles at the home release and in the morning opening. That actually they're under massive pressure, and unhappy teachers means really unhappy children. And yeah, that's very much the case. A lot of children are not having a good time in classrooms. There's lots of anxiety and stress and negative pressure and feelings of children feel like they're failures and they're not living up to scratch, to expectations. It's just a total mess. So when it's interesting as well, because classroom teachers, senior leadership team, of course, they have to carry out cuts and piling on more duties and making staff more precarious, especially sports, everyone else apart from SLT and classroom teachers. Everyone else is like increasingly thrown into labor precarity, into agency with no sick pay, holiday pension, no relatively less employment rights at work, and all of this. Classroom teachers are really quite, in their actual lived behavior, are quite right-wing. They're very conservative. They couldn't give two ishts about what other colleagues lower in the hierarchy are going through. They just, of course they'll say yes and please and thank you if you're lucky, but will they stand in solidarity with the catering staff, ground staff, the support staff in the classrooms? Absolutely no way whatsoever. You can forget it. Last decade, it's not going to happen. And that creates this total, it's not even a second class citizen system in the education system. It's like four layers of dehumanization in the hierarchy. The top of it is the SLTs, the senior leadership team. That's the head and the deputy and all of that. And then it's the head of year and the head of subjects, who are also classroom teachers. So those two things put together. Then it's classroom teachers. And then it's just like totally kicked to the curb, treated like dirt, institutionally, systemically. And around the strikes as well is the rest of the ground staff, catering staff, cleaning staff, and teaching support. This is the reality. I'm not even particularly coming with any political agenda with this, because this is just exactly what's going on. It's interesting, even when I've talked to classroom teachers who think they're really left-wing and quite radical left, who might come from actually even radical families, when I've said to them, like, and they're established, they've been classroom teachers for few or several or more years. If I say, there was one particular conversation that was interesting, I said, look, either where we're coming from ethically and politically and culturally, either we promote and we commit to the idea and the practice that we teach with solidarity, or we don't teach at all. We don't need teachers in these institutions that don't teach with solidarity. And with that I mean a real sensitive, committed, a life commitment to understanding the context of oppression and social, cultural, political, economic realities of the children and their communities and their families and their backgrounds and their ancestors, even that has given birth and born out these children. That unless you understand these things and you act with your voice, with your action in the school and in the community, unless you commit to that, just get out. Get out of education immediately. Do something else. Do something else to make your money and your career and your narcissism and all of that. It's just not, we shouldn't accept these situations, because the reality is, and I come back to this, children are being systemically treated badly oppressed every day in every single school, unless some really alternative schools that just most teaching communities, even those who think they're the most radical left, will have no orientation towards. Hope that was of interest. Really interested to hear any feedback from you. Any questions, please don't hesitate. Me, myself and my comrades are in education. right? So there are revolutionaries against colonialism and white supremacy in education. And we work closely with Professor Gus John, who's probably the most important person in advocating for justice for working class, especially black working class, but working class children in general in the British education system for a good part of 6 decades. Any questions, please don't hesitate. Please do ask, contribute, critique, reply, share, and let's really try to deepen this conversation. Many thanks.